Kia ora. On time. We'll start with the opening karakia all together now. Are we right? Because my te reo is not fabulous, so we're all doing it together, okay? Whakatiaka te tonga, kai mahinga ki te atu, kai mataara tara te tai, e haaraki te tana. Te atuia e huka te tuia hiu. Te mana mauri ora. Ka pai. My apologies. Okay, apologies today. We have Sophie online, dealing with a bit of sickness at home. So if I don't see her with a hand up, can somebody just reference that for me, please? Thank you. And everybody, and we have an apology obviously from the Mayor because she is on annual leave, correct? Thank you. All right. Everybody happy? Well, apparently here I'm required to ask for a move and a seconder for those apologies. So moved, Sam, seconded, Tracy, thank you. Not the way I normally do it. Before we get started, does anybody have any extraordinary business they'd like to bring onto the agenda? No? Anybody have any conflicts that they'd like to bring to our notice on today in relation to today's agenda?
I do.
Sam?
Yeah, so I remember myself on page 147 for the verbal report, please.
Thank you, Sam. Appreciate that. You're suggesting you're going to step out? Yeah. Okay, good as gold. Thank you. Noted. You have the terms of reference there for your noting and the minutes. The minutes for your review and draft. Are there any amendments to those minutes any member would like to make? Are there any items on the agenda? Yeah, in a minute. Are there any items in those minutes that any member would like to discuss that aren't otherwise discussed in the agenda? No? All right. Can someone move those minutes a true and correct record? Thank you, Tracy. Seconded, Annalisa. Thank you. All right. Action table. If we just reference that. Report on draft Treasury policy. For the 5th, correct? Referred from the 5th, will follow up. So still to do, correct?
Yep, and I think it's just worth noting the Treasury policy would actually bring in back to Council a Treasury briefing as well.
Okay.
And post LTP amendment, we will look to revise that Treasury policy.
All right. Same again for the report on the revolving credit facility, although we have actually got as far as this committee is likely to go, and it has been approved through council, I imagine, correct?
Yeah. I think that action's largely been closed out by
so shall we remove it from the action list? Thank you. Privacy Act training, future workshop for all councillors, and that is that. All right. Chairperson's report, I don't have one, so I'm not going to ask you to move and second that. Executive Director report. Ellie.
Thank you, Bruce. So there's a few things in this, and I think firstly I'll just pass to Bob to give a brief update on BCP.
Largely remaining stable at the moment, so the MB advice from last week is that the likelihood of us entering a phase 3 to 4, which is a heavily restricted fuel situation, is reasonably low given this continuity and the stability of the continuity of supply. They're continuing to do work on their phase 3 and 4 priority allocation classifications, which is a key piece of work that we're looking out for so we can try and mirror that in our business. the work that we're doing internally is actually understanding a per business unit volume usage on a weekly, and that will try and match up with those priority classifications when they do come through. So if we do move to a escalated situation, we know exactly where our business is going to be affected.
Okay, thank you. Before we go back to you, Ali, any questions for Bob?
Yep.
Sam?
On the Executive Director report 4.3 at the end, can somebody speak to the MBIE has also requested councils provide options for regulatory relief which may enable temporary reductions in service levels to further reduce fuel demand?
Yeah, so the ministers have put out a blanket request of all the councils about potential ideas or options which they could administer, which could see a reduction in fuel usage. So it could be the relaxing of levels of service in particular areas, which may mean a fuel usage, but there hasn't been a lot in that space.
Okay, so technically it would be for ministers, not so much us. Because I'm just wondering how that aligns with us having to do an SCP if it was a reduction in level of service.
Effectively, that's what would be signalling. Well, we'd be signalling to them is that if we want to reduce level of service, we would want that regulatory relief to not force a SCP.
Yeah, cool.
So give us an example, Bob.
It could be things like building inspections. So we've got regulatory requirements to do those within 2 working days. If you relax those working days or how you do them or move to more remote inspections, that could be a potential change. Yeah.
Okay.
Cool.
Happy.
Cool. Thank you.
Sophie?
Sorry, my phone just said mute off. Question around that is more around if the costs of meeting our levels of service in other ways are impacted by the fuel crisis. Do we know whether the ministers are considering that? So, for instance, if the fuel crisis drives up the price of bitumen, which isn't technically fuel, obviously, that we burn in the vehicles, however, it would impact how much borrowing we might have to do to achieve the projects we've said.
In the meetings to date with the ministers, they haven't provided any sort of commentary on that cost escalation side of things and the debt relief that they may provide councils. Yeah.
Just on that, and maybe Steve, you'd like to reflect on this, but that's a wider conversation, Bob, than regulatory relief or ministerial relief. That one, Sophie, I think goes to work program, because if we're talking about a temporary escalation in the price of bitumen, then I would have thought you would be also talking about looking at your work program and working out how you're actually going to avoid that cost in the short term. So it might be sweating a road asset or something like that. Now, that's entirely up to you, but that's the mitigations would be wider than just the conversations around a regulatory reset. And I'd be a bit disappointed if, and I'm actually doing the work at council here, but I'd be a bit disappointed if we were gung-ho on our program in a circumstance where we could put we could put at risk the fiscal operating surplus or otherwise of the council. So that's kind of just the way I would think about it. Has this been discussed at council?
It has been discussed with senior managers around or a range of work programs about what we're doing to manage our cost profile overall. And certainly we can bring, and that's part of the work that Bob and the BCP team are doing, are looking at those areas that require all the products and byproducts from the oil, and what are we doing to manage our costs? What can we control now? And, actually making some changes now.
Yep, good.
I think just adding to that is, as part of that BCP group, we do have Cord and Selwyn Water as part of that as well.
Yep. All right, back to you, Ellen.
I think just drawing people's attention to point 4, page 22 on diligent as well. But for a sort of good news story, the Office of the Auditor General just published a report on their website that notes all the audits that they've completed in the year to June 2025. So we were 78-ish audits completed. We were one of 10 who was classed as a standard audit, so non-standard being emphasis and matter, qualification points, and obviously there's still one of those audits that remains incomplete as and when OAG published that report.
I have a comment in relation to this. I'd just like to thank, not a comment, but a thank your team, Ali, and you as well, Annalisa. Even though I'd love to take full credit for the work that went in prior years, I'm not going to. I'd like to thank you because I know that the year before was difficult, and to end up in the situation where we had a good outcome is credit to the work you put in with Alison and the team. Can we put that on the record, please? Thank you. Okay. All right. Everybody happy? Can I just have a mover that we accept that report? Thanks, Annalisa. Seconded, Sam. Happy? Health and safety. John.
Morning, Mr Chair, committee members. We will take the Health and Safety Wellbeing Report as read, and I will briefly go through the executive summary and then open for questions. There is an increased use in our TELUS EAP network, with staff reaching out for various counselling needs, and some of these are not reflected in the current stats because they came after the report was submitted. In line with those counselling services, there is a reflected increased spend over the budgeted costs. Interactions with health, safety and wellbeing, the team are increasing with changes being made across council. It seems as it is. Our EHS core platform kickoff was completed, the initial scoping being completed on access, integration of existing staff roles and training went very well. Additional support for the critical risk teams, completing bow ties and actions, including recruitment of new co-leads around some fatigue stuff. The Rolleston HQ Blue Light safety team training has been conducted, the system tested for effectiveness and ongoing drills throughout the year, which will be part of council. Happy to take questions.
Questions for the team? Comments? Sam?
Sorry. Hi. How are you?
Yes.
Page 29, you mentioned other local authorities within Canterbury are now looking to replicate our program concerning trends, etc. Given the outlay of your team and our staff for this program, is there any cost recovery for these entities wanting to implement this system? I know that greater good's a lovely thing, and not wanting to sound too callous, but what would the cost of delivery be in staff time, and do you believe SDC should be compensated for the outlay?
Probably I can answer that better. There's a lot of cooperation that goes on between local governments, either formally through things like LG&Z, but informally there's a lot of work that staff do with each other across. There's a lot of sharing, unless it was something of huge substance that we'd invested massive money in. It's probably would be contrary to the way the cooperation that we have with our partners all over the country. So cool. I think the short answer is probably no.
Okay. Yeah, awesome. I just wanted to make sure that it's not a huge, significantly large portion of work and hours, and then we're handing the keys to the kingdom to someone else without a bit of the green back. Thank you.
Thank you. One of my legacy comments on my final meeting in regards to health and safety, we never take the health and safety wellbeing report as read. So if we can please not minute that. my legacy statement, I think I've said for the last 6 years, is that let's not minute that we take the health and safety report as read, because it's great for you to actually talk through the report, which is exactly what you just did. I think in our last hui I made reference to the health and safety reform that's coming in and the emphasis that's going to be placed on critical risks. And I can see the additional work that you've done from last hui to this hui with telling us, I think I presented the question on, tell us what we're doing about those critical risks. So great work there. I can see that you've actually put those controls in kind of green, amber and red. I'm still not getting a flavour though of whether those critical risks are managed. You know, so you've told us what the controls are, but you've got them in kind of red, amber and green. But at a higher, more strategic level, I want to know, are we managing our critical risks?
Yeah, and I suppose that our next iteration of this will be how we provide the evidence that those controls are effective, and we are checking that they are actually being done, and if not, why not?
Yeah, exactly. So I would kind of, I guess things take time, right? But we've only got, half a dozen critical risks. So my expectation would be next quarter that I don't really want to see any red, partially. I think we've got, when you go to the next page and talk about the controls, you see we're partially controlling them. It just doesn't look good on this report, if touch wood, if anything was to happen. So just strongly encourage that by next quarter, you're actually telling us that these controls are mitigated to a level. There'll always be work to be done. We're always trying to continuously improve, but we're actually doing enough work to reduce the risk. We're mitigating the risk, which doesn't mean we're eliminating it, but it means we're reducing the risk. So that's the kind of high level bit that's missing from this report. The other thing that's come out in the reform suggestion, which I recommend you have a look at, is the impact on PCBU of landowners. So at the moment, the emphasis is on the actual landowner, but for councils in particular, I'm not sure if you've read this, John, but it's actually going to be around the operator. So for our land that we let third parties use, there's going to be more emphasis on them and what they're doing and how they're mitigating risk. So I've been working with other councils just to go, well, what does that actually mean for us as a council? Is it less on us? But actually we need to get confidence from the people that are using our land, if they're running an activity, for example, that we understand how they're managing that risk. So it's just, there's some interesting kind of detail that's coming out about what that reform's going to look like.
Yep, it's funny you should mention that. Because last week there was an incident in a facility that we lease out. We don't operate it. We don't have staff there at all. And it's certainly raised a whole lot of questions for us about how we interact with that, how we record that, what our visibility of it, what if any, are the implications for us. So that is exactly that has spurred that particular investigation, which John and I were talking about this morning. And we want to be able to present information that makes it a lot clearer. We're also trying to keep close to what's going on with the legislative change. There's various webinars that we've been looking at. There's one coming up soon looking at the Ports of Auckland decision, which I think is some really interesting stuff in there about how does, in this case, either council and or the CE assure themselves that stuff's actually happening the way that they think it should be happening.
Exactly.
So it's very easy to do a tick box. It's very easy to have a nice report, very easy to have a nice policy. But how do we make sure that Steve sleeps at night? Because we need him to sleep. So we're trying to get ourselves much more into that space. It also, for us, raises questions about our relationships with our CCOs and what we need to know in there. So I think there's a whole higher level of work now that John and I have been talking about, making sure that we get over because of the changes that are happening, so we can assure people what's going on.
Yeah, great, thank you.
Steve?
Yeah, thanks. I just probably also want to add, this is an evolution of work, and we appreciate the leadership you've given us, Annalisa, and the direction over the past couple of years. But certainly I think with our new council too, we've set up portfolios and we've, health and safety is a conversation at the portfolio level too, so it can be managed. So we're trying to get as many eyes over health and safety at different levels of the organisation. So not only I, but also our governors can get assurance that the work being done as close to the front line and as close to where the work is actually being done as assessed. And that also includes, the walkarounds where senior staff and councillors do get to then actually talk to the staff doing the work and find out what's working and what's not, what are the dumb things we do, and how can we change that.
Thank you. I'm going to just put a loop around and emphasise what Annalisa just said. But as a job of work for your team, I'd like to see come back here the health and safety strategic plan, but I'd like to see it come back in a format that has council, that's been workshopped at council, okay? This is a governance group around managing risk. I want to know what the councillors feel in relation to the importance of health and safety here and what it means from a strategic perspective. Because culture is driven from the top and it is driven strategically. That means you guys have got to start telling these guys what your expectations are. And if there is a health and safety collision, and there can be, for example, I had one in another organisation, I've traversed it before, but getting the lights back on in an environment where you've got an unsafe working environment is not something we should be celebrating, but if it is something that's being emphasised at council level, you guys need to explore what that means from a safety and health perspective. So, and I can assure you that the Auckland decision emphasises that the role of governance and senior management is to set those particular circumstances alight. And that's where we will be held accountable. If we don't give you the right message, you won't do the right things. And you exercise that through your interrogation of the critical risks of the business, right? And having these controls in place, quite frankly, I don't know what they mean. I don't know whether or not they're shifting the work program from compliance to cultural, and my expectation is they should, and therefore I'd like to see more coming through. Yes, it is iterative, but it's kind of urgent, right? So my view will be is that it can't dominate the whole of the organisation. We've got work to do, but it must be a cultural part of the organisation to make sure that everybody goes home alive, and that we're not really driving the organisation to succeed at all costs. You've got to be focused on outcomes, but we've also got to be focused on what we're doing. So to that end, when I look at your critical risks as well, some of them are really self-explanatory. Lone worker, working around water, driving, psychological risk. I'm not sure how active construction and maintenance sites is a critical risk. That is an environment we work in, but what are the risks you're trying to refer to there? I think you need to interrogate that a bit more, because we've got lots of them. But that could necessarily be working with heavy machinery, working with specialised equipment, working in a dangerous environment, at height, whatever. So I think you kind of need to be more specific. And as you evolve these things, Steve, therefore you need to be assured, and I want to be assured that we are moving towards a cultural change. Okay? So part of your control and part of your regime must be towards that, because that's the only way you're going to get real outcomes. If we're just going to be compliance orientated, we'll be bloody good at ticking boxes, but we won't be very good at making sure people understand that when something is going wrong, you don't immediately rush it at you. Go, hang on a minute. That's creating a risk for us. Okay. And then there's two or three other little questions I have in relation to what you're talking about, but you had working in and around water. We had 2 entry staff members experienced a medical event in the water, around the water. What was it? What are you talking about there?
It was at a aquatic centre on dry land. Junior people just with a medical event.
Was that in relation to our staff or in relation to a member of the public?
Staff.
So, okay, all right. So that comes down to sort of kind of the appropriate fence at the top then? Do we have people that, for example, experience asthma attacks when they're exposed to chlorine and things like that? You know, that's actually placing people at risk, right?
Correct.
Which is what I was assuming it was. I was going like, how do we not know that, you know? All that kind of stuff is simple conversational stuff that we have.
Thank you.
All right. So thank you, Annalise. That was actually, but driving forward, that is what you will be interrogated on, and I can assure you council minutes will become extremely important in relation to how do we set the tone and what do we do. And the buck doesn't necessarily stop with Steve. Unfortunately, he's part and parcel of the governance conversation. The Auckland case, in my view, was an attempt to get one person, but they could have equally as got the governance group as well. And just remember that, because that's where it all stops. Okay. I don't think you have to be on the ground managing in each individual risk, but you do need to be setting the strategic tone and then making sure that they are operating that way. Okay, are there any other questions in relation to this? Good start though. Like seeing it heading in the right direction. Keep going.
I just had
Trace.
Just had one quick one. Listening to what everyone's been saying, I noticed and I'd give you the page, leading indicators update. I can't see the page. It says that the trends are showing that less people are signing up for essential training. And I just noticed the word essential. And I just wonder, then you talk about reasons include prior commitments on the dates, often work related. So what sort of stuff are you looking at doing, either to further interrogate why beyond the conflicting dates with what stuff that comes up for work?
Correct.
And how because the essential bit was the bit that got me. These are not nice to have trainings, this is important.
Yeah. And our team have been working with heads of departments and managers around what good looks like for them in the training space. So as we go, it's an iteration, and it does evolve around what work we have to do. So we need to be agile in that space. So we are working with those teams to ensure that those training compliances are complete.
And at what point, is there a point at which you have a red flag concern that a certain number or whatever are not being completed by particular staff or groups of staff?
Yeah, sure. If we have continual absences or referrals, we will have that conversation with the executive director of that part of the business.
Thank you.
Thank you. Page 34, with our aggression and violence towards, not our aggression and violence towards staff, but with the reported aggression and violence towards staff, is there a predominant trend? Is there a feature? Is it in one location specifically?
An answer is no. It's
Across
variable.
the board.
Yeah.
Rough. And all different causes that are catalysting these?
There's a lot going on for people, and it's being reflected in some of those conversations and some of those interactions with our staff.
And I gather that's the same with psychosocial risks as well?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. So we can't...
Look, as we get the data, Councillor, I think it'll become quite clear over the preceding few months on where people are, and we can probably timeline, what's been happening in country and in world and how that affects people.
Is there anything we can do as a governance team to help alleviate any of these, or at least help play interference, I suppose?
Look, all help is great. We're doing a really good job. Our team are doing a really good job. Our frontline workers do really good work. We do training around that stuff, and those frontline workers are really, really good at diffusing and de-escalating situations. So, yep, we're doing well.
Yeah, and if they're being reported, then it means that you're doing your job. So well done.
I'm just going to dwell on this one for a moment. And it's not in relation to health and safety, but it is in relation to health and safety, but it does talk to risk. And we've got a paper coming up which talks a bit to risk and how and our program in it. And the reason why I'm going to dwell on this is that this is what I would call a unsystematic risk. This is not something you can diversify out of the business or manage out of the business by taking actions. These are risks that we take as a business because of what we do. And it is useful to have a conversation about the organisation you have around how you mitigate it. So it's not, it's you're going to confront it every day. It's how we train our people, how we protect our people, and how we give people our relief around some of these stresses. Because getting yelled at and growled at on a daily basis is ultimately going to end up in a position where it'll have an impact on the person. And so these are the things that I think are really good opportunities, I think, from a governance perspective and from a council perspective, understanding what you are doing and then applying that right across the business, because we have these risks that we must accept in the business because of what we do. And it is very good for us to interrogate the programs you have to govern them and manage them. So this is a good one, but there will also be things like we have to accept a certain amount of environmental risk in what we do because of the circumstances we're in. It's how we prep people for it, what kit we give them, and how we allow them to proceed. So if we hold on to that thought as we move into the conversations we have later, we can apply some of that thinking around that, because it's all the same. It's just in a different environment. So to that, I just had one quick last question, and it was in relation to the use of our psychological services and our counselling services. Is this in relation to the fact that we have made them available and we are encouraging people to use them, or is it in relation to an environmental pressure that they've got coming? So one is a positive outcome, the other one is a negative. And I was just curious. Sometimes when you start, you don't get any momentum until you make these things available, and then they're a healthy part of the environment.
I think it's a bit of both. It has been available in different variations and iterations, and I think the version that we have now with our provider gives some more and improved versions of that counselling service. And I think people actually feel that they get a lot out of the services, whether it's for personal or business needs. Yeah. But it's definitely improved over the last 14 months since we've gone with that provider.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I'd also add there's been a bit going on. There's some change processes in place. And as part of our plan for rolling out change processes, we make sure that these are available, like on site, for people who are not necessarily having the interviews and discussions that they might want to have had. And people are thankful, they're making use of that. So we know now, we know the numbers that go immediately that day to go and talk things through with that. So yes, we are proactively encouraging that, where as a support for change processes on top of the normal other things that are going on. So I'm expecting to see a bit more of its use, but I think it's a very good investment of our time.
We are in a position where we're going to be faced with accelerated change right across the board, and we're also going to be faced with a chunk of displacement, because some of the people that are going to experience the change will be displaced and will be lost, because the AI tools that are becoming available to us will displace. And the question is, where do we see where is our social and economic responsibility to our people? The reality of it is it's to the point where they're no longer our people, but that's a tough place to play. And I think you as a council, you need to give some thought to what that means, because throwing someone on the beach potentially is not without the equipment to cope with it, without the understanding that life's going to be different, is not probably the way where you want to play. But that's something for you guys to discuss at the governance level. But change is inevitable. I mean, the velocity of it will be imposed on us, I would imagine, over time. You're already seeing a level of central government interference in the administration of local government. One of the ways to defeat that is obviously to embrace the AI tools you've got to become more efficient. But it's very easy at a distance to just say to organisations, these are the metrics you must perform to. The unfortunate bit is that the tools are becoming available to enable that to happen, but it does have a human cost. And I wonder whether or not you might like to think as a group about how you might support that from a human capital perspective in terms of just a bit of not only counselling, but an element of opportunity training. You know, so as they leave here, they leave with a level of optimism around what it could be as opposed to what it's just happened to me. All right? And that's right across the economy, right across the Takiwari. I mean, this is happening everywhere. Okay, thank you for that. Good work, keep it up. But you can see that your roles are changing and you can see where it's happening. Yeah, okay. And I like the fact that we are far more, less, I know that we've got the compliance bits in here, but we're actually doing the stuff which is more strategic. So thank you for that. I have a mover that we accept that report. Thank you, Annalisa. Second to Tracy. Great. Sensitive expenditure. Ms. Becker. Good morning.
Good morning.
You've got the most exciting part of the agenda.
Sadly, I do get a little bit excited about this, so I'll calm the farm. So this is the second risk and audit report for sensitive expenditure, so I'm hoping that this is going to start building the picture. I am still working through a number of ways of updating the processes, and there's a number of BAU processes that are occurring at the same time. So as I build on that, things will improve. So you'll note from the latest report, you will have the Q3 result and you'll have a consolidated to-date report as well. So we'll start building on that. I've also included the training and development that wasn't there previously because there's a number with the new councillors. There's a number of training that's been taking place now as well. The only thing I do want to point out is that although this is the picture of what has hit the general ledger in this quarter, there are a number of things that it's timing. It takes quite a while for some of this stuff to come through. So again, part of the improvements that we're going to make for next year will hopefully mean that we've got a more timely and it's more accurate for each quarter as we go through. I've also added the gifts register. There hasn't been much that's come through. It seems to be that it peaks through Christmas, but there are the odd thing that does come through throughout the year. But other than that, that is the picture of where we stand right now.
Questions? Sam, then Tracy.
Have my taxi fares been included in travel allowance, or has it been missed?
If I've seen it come through, then it would be part of that. So I will have to do a bit more digging. Like I said, it's quite a clunky process that I've got. I have to literally go digging through everything. So I will go look for that. So thank you. That's something else for me to look at.
Yeah, I'll flick you through the dates. Yeah,
Thank
I
you.
just note that I've got nothing listed as taxi, and I have. So thank you.
One thing I love about sensitive risk expenditure, when you give it visibility, it gets managed. Yeah. Nobody has to say anything. It gets managed. Tracy.
Mine is about the Melbourne Community Board. And thank you, by the way. This is great.
Isn't it?
It's easy to read. It would be sensitive expenditure for dummies, which means me. So I thank you for that. It's clear as a bell. And because it's clear as a bell, it's kind of things jump out. And so my first thought regarding the Melbourne Community Board was that there's one outlier. So my first thought was, has there been a miscalculation? And so that's the first thing, is that we're sure there's not. The second thing that leads to that is, do you know the budget for the Melbourne Community Board for their travel and expenditure?
It bit me. Yes, there is a separate report that goes to the Melbourne Community Board that does have the budgets on that. Obviously, I look at the actuals when they come through, so I will make sure that that everything reconciles as it comes through. The outlier that you're looking at, that was one of the questions I knew you were going to ask, is where does that person live? And they are coming in from quite a distance, but maybe that's something we can look at as to how we can help manage that going forwards.
Okay, the follow-up question to that, Bruce, is that I just have a concern because the Melbourne Community Board is on a targeted rate. for its budget. I'm just concerned that either what it's at now isn't going to be enough based on these numbers. I just doubled them because it's 6 months, right? So that's my concern. Do we need to talk about raising that targeted rate? And I'm not sure how that would go down in Melbourne Tawera, or will there be a look to Selwyn District Council if there is a shortfall there, because this seems to be tracking quite high. So that's the tenor of what I'm asking.
Right, well, we'll go to Steve on this because obviously the chair can't answer that question. So,
oh, sorry.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, look, in terms of the conversations we've had with the board, we did talk about travel expenditure and we did send them some information again last month. And I think what we're also looking at is the induction and the bedding in period for that new community board. But we have sent some messages, and I know as a board and through the chair, Mr. Frew, that they are going to be talking about prioritisation of attendance at Melbourne meetings, given it is a fairly substantial ward and there is a bit of travel there. To your second question about will council have to foot the bill, not directly, and so essentially no, because the Melbourne Community Board has a reserve fund, and any overspends, either if it can't be managed within their current budget, their overspend will come out of their reserve fund. But similarly, we will be producing this data for the board so that they are aware of the travel and they can see where their expenditures are, and we're looking forward that they will begin to manage this. And from July this year, they are moving into a different rate of meetings, so they're going from 12 meetings down to 6 meetings a year. That won't stop the informal meetings and the connections with the residents associations, which they've been doing really well. But I think with a number of those things, I would expect to see that the mileage claims should be able to be managed within the current budget.
thank you.
Thank you. I just want to acknowledge, so I've got two things. The first is I just want to acknowledge that not everybody claims equally, and there is nothing wrong with somebody claiming what they're entitled to. So I just want to make that publicly clear. I'm aware of, I don't claim everything. That is not to make me a martyr or a saint. That's my choice. That doesn't mean I'm beating up on somebody who is claiming what they're entitled to. That leads me to my second thing, which is perhaps do we need to relook at our policy so that it's very clear what can't be claimed and stuff like that, because that gives some level of security to those who are claiming what they are entitled to and within those parameters.
Quick comment on that before I go to you, Sam. Sorry, I'll jump in ahead of you. Is that part of this is policy and part of it is a guideline. The guidelines probably respond to the rate in which you can. My view would be is we get the policy right, we set it, yep, and then you respond to your guidelines around what level of rate you're allowed. You know, if it's the IRD recovery rate on travel, then that moves over time. Yep. So my view would be is that when you're doing that, make sure you break it up. Otherwise, the policy will be back in front of council all the time. And what you want it to do is respond to the realities of cost.
Yeah, I guess my point was more about, if I'm explicit, is another councillor has mentioned to me the notion that if you live outside the district, that you only start charging from when you hit the district and things like that. And is that explicit in our policy? And is that something we want in our policy? And that's more what I'm talking about, because as I've said from the beginning of this crusade on sensitive expenditure, if you will, is that it's about protecting people as much as it is. It's not, for me, it's not about punishing people. It's about protecting people. And that's where you have to have that clarity that everybody is reading a policy and concluding the same thing. Yep. So that's that part. Thank you.
So at that level, happy to see the policy here, but I'd like to see it developed by management, and then we'll shoot it up to council, because that is actually, even though it doesn't respond to a very big cost, it responds to a very interrogated cost. You better get it right. Okay. Sam.
Hi, me again. Under conference and memberships, why is mine cheap? No, I'm not going to do that again. So humble. So I should actually have a conference cost on there as well, so that figure will be higher. So taxis and conference. I think we've just left that off.
I think as Becca noted earlier, we've got a bit of a timing thing when things appear in this report. It's not that it will be missed, but it will appear next time.
Oh, cool. Yep. Transparency, integrity, and honesty.
All of those.
The lesser known dwarves.
Okay. Can I have a mover for that report, that we accept that report? Thank you, Annalisa. Seconded, Tracy. Oh, sorry, Annalisa, do you have a question?
I just had a quick one on the gifts register. So great work on the transparency. In my experience with working with central government and local government organisations, you can take a different position on where you sit around gifts. I mean, I've always had a strong view that absolutely no gifts through a procurement process. So making sure that there's alignment through the procurement process and gifts. And making sure that that kind of reconciles really well. I always do the kind of front page of the paper test, and that's from working in central government, right? So this is probably a message more to the leadership team is going, all of this is OIA-able. So, how comfortable are you with having your name associated to a major contractor in Christchurch around, a gift? And, it's immaterial values, it's small, but just something to kind of maybe keep your eye on. And if you think there's hardly anything in here. So I kind of go, well, actually, is this a full list? Because it can be gifts and hospitality as well, right? So actually being taken out for a lunch or taken out for a dinner is actually a gift. So to go to the other extreme, which I'm not suggesting that you need to, but something to keep in mind is that I worked with one central government agency where they just went no gifts. And it just made it really easy. There's just no gifts. So if gifts came, they made it very well known to all their key contractors and suppliers. And at Christmas time, I think like a month before Christmas, I'd send a letter to their major suppliers saying, we love working with you, but please don't send us gifts because we're not allowed to. And if the gifts arrived, they actually sent them back, because it was just getting hard, and OIAs were getting hard. So I'm not suggesting that as an option, but probably more a leadership decision on like how comfortable are you if this gets OIA'd around the questions and stuff. So if it does get hard, then that is an easy option to go to, is that you just go, no gifts.
Thank you, Annalisa. And like you and I come out of an environment where the conversations around these sorts of things end up at the SEC and things like that. So the reality of it is that it is far better to have a cultural view on this thing, that it's not really part of the business. If the business is won by a contractor because they win it on their quality, on their price, then that's good enough. But we also live in a small community, and going out for coffee with a mate's not a bad thing either. And we were, it got a bit silly over time. But so you've just got to make sure that you're running at a cultural level, Steve, so people understand that. So you get away from the conversation about, where you hear your procurement manager or something like that saying, well, I'm going to the rugby with Joe and we always appoint, that's the sort of stuff you're trying to get away from. You are, but you've got to run a sensibility rule over it as well. Having dinner with a friend is not a bad thing either. And if he picks up the bill because he's a mate, that's fine. But if it impacts on a significant, as Annalisa says, if you're going to end up in the front page of the paper, if it becomes pretty obvious, Sam?
I would just like to touch on the fact that a lot of these things would be in reciprocation of gifts to either staff as a whole. The outlay from a number of these individuals was significantly higher than what the bottle of wine or 2 bottles of wine. But I totally get what you're saying. That's sort of that question of, do we say no gifts come through this door, like in the sense that would then warrant a reciprocation of gifting back? That might be an easier way, because I'd hate for public perception to be, oh, well, such and such got a more favourable outcome because they dropped off lunch for the staff. Just
Gifts are intriguing because they normally manifest themselves in a physical expression of it. So, a couple of bottles of wine and things like that. And I always found pragmatically, you actually pull them and they just go into a pool, and then the social club raffle them or something like that. That's kind of how you deal with it. So it's easy. It is the hospitality one that actually that will trip you up. It's the rugby tickets or the that sort of stuff, which is a little bit more invisible. So however you deal with them, either no gifts or there is no such thing as a personal gift. If it's a gift, it's gift to council and then managed accordingly. That sometimes is a way in which someone can express it, and then how you deal with it internally is entirely up to you guys, right? I think that's what we used to do, Annalise. We used to stick them in the social club, and then we'd have a $2 raffle at the end of the year, and kind of easy enough, because you can't stop people giving. All right. Are we happy now that we've had a good look at this? The reality of it is, what you're trying to do is drive culture. So when you're talking about it, what you're really doing is moving towards a consensus, a cultural consensus. So do I have someone move we accept the extensive expenditure report? And Lisa, seconded. Tracy, thank you. Risk management. Thank you, Becca. Morning, team. Sorry, we're having a giggle up here. We've got a time here that I thought we might be ending, and Alison's just told me we're not ending then. She knows when we're ending. We'll see. Okay, good morning, Dom.
Good morning, everybody. So look, I'll start with apologies from Sonia. Unfortunately, she can't be here today. So Michael and I are going to endeavour to take credit for the work that Sonia has done over the last 8 weeks in this space, and do her justice here today. So look, we will take this report as read. I think in terms of the exception reporting that we're now doing in this risk space, this is how we now propose to report on our new risks and our high rated risks. So you'll see that as an appendix. The big discussion that we're looking to have with this committee today is around the updates that have been done to the policy and the framework following last quarter's arc. The big things that we did, look, materially nothing has changed in terms of what this says and expects of people around council. But what has been done is a real look at, is this readable? Is it usable across council? And what should sit in the policy, and what is really more framework stuff that on a day-to-day needs to be managed at that more operational level. So we are proposing that the framework goes forth as moving forward an ELT level approved document, and it's the policy that sits over the top that goes through to council. These have been really really toughly tested over the last sort of 10 weeks across the organisation. So members of every directorate, at head of department, at team leader, at operational level, to make sure people understand. And then we all looked Steve squarely in the eye and asked him if he was happy to own this. So look, really happy to take questions on these documents, but comfortable that this has been tested as, do you understand it and can you use it, from our staff.
Questions? Annalisa.
Because this hasn't been an 8-week journey. This has probably been a 2-year journey. So, I did read it for probably the 10th time, and I think it's great. I think it's great work. So congratulations to Sonia and the wider team that have supported her. So no questions from me. My fellow colleagues may have some questions, but I'd very much like to move that the risk management policy and framework get adopted.
Thank you, Annalisa. Sam.
Cool. So awesome to see that the residual risk seems to be in alignment with the new council's direction. Thank you, Sonia, and team. Although for the 4 likely major, I'd just be interested to know if any of those are actually, if their risk likelihood or impact of risk to us residually has been reduced in any way, shape or form through Selwyn Water Limited's transfer, or if we actually have current liability or indemnity insurance policies that cover this, because it would technically pull that further away from being in the major.
Yeah, so look, we are checking all of those risks on a regular basis and making sure that we've recorded the right controls, and therefore, if the control is in place, how that impacts either the likelihood or the consequence of it. We absolutely have asked that control owners consider the impacts of the Selwyn water transfer, and yeah, we can absolutely remind people to consider insurance for those that sit in that space.
Cool. Insurance is only worth anything if you claim on it. But not saying that we want to have any accidents or issues either.
That is very definitely the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff conversation.
It is. But yeah, cool. Thank you if we could look into that. Because that might bring us down into the oranges on some of those, which is where we're a bit more comfortable as an organisation and a council.
Thank you, Sam. Yep. Yeah. We'll get to insurance later. Yeah. Just on this, this is I'm going to Annalise's point. It's a cracking piece of work, right? And we've had a good look at it a couple of times. And I really yes, the policy is council owned. The framework is your distribution of policy. And I've spoken to you about this. It is still very detailed, and how you guys actually manage to get into a circumstance where it is considered regularly and not onerous is entirely up to you guys. Okay, but I think that you've got it in the right place now, right? And policy talks very definitely to the framework, and councillors should be able to just look you in the eye and say, we said and we expect, and that is how you distribute it. I don't know whether or not you were planning to ever, when you have changes in your framework outcomes, whether or not you ever plan to bring it back. But I think from an information perspective, if you're making major changes in the way in which you disperse it, you probably should, because it would be useful for us to just know that, okay, we de-emphasise this and we emphasise this because it may, the last time we looked at it was now, and we may have an expectation if you go back and revisit it, that's how you're engaging with it. A couple of quick points in relation to the framework and the policy. If you go to, I'm sorry, Annalise, I'm just going to relitigate one little bit here because I think it's wrong, okay? Well, I think, and it is 6.3E. Chief Executive is responsible for ensuring that council is not exposed to unnecessary or uncontrolled risk. Uncontrollable risk is something that is inevitable, okay? So you can't ensure council is not exposed to it, right? I think that probably should read, I'm trying to give you a bit of an out here, Steve, without giving you an out, is ensuring council is made aware and understands the processes for managing any, I won't call it unnecessary because there's no such thing. Yeah, so what I'm looking for is that you've got a process for managing any unnecessary and uncontrollable risk, because I don't know unnecessary there, but uncontrollable risk, you've got to have a process for managing it, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're mitigating it, right? Because it's inevitably a bit like, this is where I was pointing to the health and safety risk. You've got an uncontrollable risk in the community because people are going to yell at our people. What are the processes that you use for managing that is what you are responsible for, okay? But to make you responsible for ensuring I'm not exposed to an uncontrollable risk, it's not possible and it's not fair. So I'm trying to be, you've got to, so that I think you just want to reflect on that one, I think, Dom, and get that in the wording in the right place.
Yeah, so look, I think that aligns quite closely with D, and so it would be helpful if we, pragmatically, if we could take that away and take it to council with that feedback and just amend it rather than get a bring us back
I think
again.
I think I would ask you do that, because it's not a risk if I was Steve that I would accept. Right, I'm not going to accept that, because I can't do anything about some clown. What I want to know is if somebody's going to run through that door and council's in session, and how do we manage that? How do we manage that process in the unlikely event we get but in the unlikely event we get an idiot like they had at the Trump dinner, where rush through every piece of security and still manage to get most of the way in. All right. So with that in mind, is everybody comfortable? Because we've had a really good go at this. Sorry, Trace, missed you there.
Just a couple of quick things. Yes, agree with Annalisa 100% that the work that sits behind getting to something that is this readable is huge. And so I do want to commend everybody, both from this committee prior and the staff who've got here. This to me feels like a really good move towards high trust, high accountability, and that second one is worth noting, that the two go hand in hand. Just following some conversations that I've had with colleagues, I just want to clarify, and there may be people out there amongst the 3 people who are watching us live and the 4 who later watch delayed, the left-hand column of the inherent and residual risks, likely, etc., is that calculated from the perspective of prior things happening, data from other councils or other incidents to get that left-hand column operating? I guess what I'm saying is that this is not just a lick your finger and put it in the air to see which way the wind's blowing, but if you could just give us a little bit of layperson description of how that left-hand column is arrived at.
I'll certainly do my best in Sonia's absence. No, so look, in our framework we have some guide as to what the consequences are, and in each risk what that would look like, so that we are actually measuring them against an objective standard rather than just me making it up on the day as to what I think. Absolutely, we have subject matter experts on each of these things, and that's why our risk owners and our control owners are across the organisation rather than them all just sitting with Steve, because we rely on subject matter expertise as well, and then a verification process through ELT before those are arrived at.
And in simple terms, is there an element of example use? What are the sorts of things that might happen that make it 1 versus 5?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think we all rely on the experiences that we have, and so we've got teams of experts here who they've seen things before, and so can absolutely build that into the assessment that they do.
Perfect. Thank you for that.
Steve.
Yeah, thanks. Look, I just wanted to just kind of round this out from a staff point of view, and you gave me the opportunity last meeting, Mr. Chair, to say, am I entirely comfortable with this, and suggest you go away and get comfortable. Well, I think from a process point of view and a culture point of view, this is not a set of documents that have been developed in an office by 1 or 2 people thinking theoretically. This has been a document that's been taken back out to the business owners and the business delivery staff to get them to actually quantify this. And I think to Dom's point around how do we get confidence in what's inherent versus what's residual, it's because our staff are doing the work, have informed this work. And with that basis, that's why I'm confident, because it hasn't been done by 1 or 2 people. It's been owned by many, and the contribution by many is why we've got, I think, quite a really robust and defendable document that I'm happy to stand by.
Awesome. Because while I appreciate Tracy's statement in relation to moving to a high trust model, we do have an internal audit process that will still revisit it on our behalf over time, and the framework is where that concentration will go. In my view, the framework is still, there's still a lot in it the synthesis of that will be the key actions that will talk to that framework, right? That every single one of your business leads will expect to see in the processes of making a decision. So it may well be that you will get over time more feedback saying this is how we actually dispatch this, and that's where you're looking. When that happens, make sure you bring it back to us to have a look at it. And I'm not saying we're going to approve it, we just want to know about it, okay? All right, on that basis, really good document. And there being no further comments, do we have someone move the risk management update? Thank you, Annalisa. Of course we were, and seconded by Tracy. And I'd just like to say, Annalisa, before you go, that was one of your key objectives, and it's been done. Done well. Thank you. All right. Internal audit. Stay where you are.
Yep, we've been told. So yes, we will take the paper as read, but note that there are a few things going on in the internal audit space that we'll just touch on. I think if we'll start on the program and how that's progressing. So you might have noticed that we don't have Deloitte here to talk about the next internal audit. Procurement is a beast of an internal audit space in terms of documentation, from plans to evaluation to final contracts and recommendation reports. It was a serious body of work, and that is in the final stages of being reviewed. And we will look to have, essentially for audit and risk, 2 internal audit updates next ARC. I think that's in August. But we're quite comfortable. We've been working closely with the procurement team, so they haven't been sitting doing nothing. There are a number of things they've identified already as part of this review that they can start working on, and so we're not concerned that this creates a significant risk or gap in terms of long-term impacts. So that's where we get to. And then we had anticipated instructing Deloitte to start looking at asset management as the next sort of key internal audit work program. However, the team have done a huge amount of work since asset management was identified as a risk 2 years ago and put on that plan. And Deloitte reviewed the work that had been done and the external review that had already sort of sat over across the work that the team had done on asset management, and actually said they had no value to add to that space at this time. And so what we have proposed to do is actually swap asset management to an accounts payable review. That lines up quite nicely with a lot of the counter fraud and sensitive expenditure, and just timing in an economic environment like this. This is a real risk area for us, so making sure that we've got that right. So that's sort of what's happening in our internal audit program at the moment. We have also presented for discussion, and happy to take comments and feedback, what year 3 is likely to look like. So this is in paragraph 4 of the paper, talks about the recommendations from Deloitte. They do run through to our risks, but we're also happy to take away any comments if this group has identified areas that they think need particular focus or attention. Finally, we'll just quickly touch on the internal audit recommendation status. So we have looked to do a bit of an update as to how things are really tracking, and particularly picking up on areas where there's slippage or risk of slippage. The last 8 weeks we've rolled out regular stand-ups where everybody gets eyeballed and asked how are they actually tracking against their actions that are due. What that has identified is that there are a number of interdependencies in some of our actions that people hadn't quite turned their mind to when we just had a single internal audit. Now that we've got 6, we're looking and going, there is a crossover between our sensitive expenditure and our procurement, and we've now got a procurement internal audit coming and contract management recommended for year 3. So what we have done there is look to realign some of those timeframes, but in a way that we're really comfortable that this doesn't amend the risk coverage. These aren't high risk areas where a slight delay exposes us to greater risk. What it does is make sure that we actually close out the action correctly and make sure we've done a good job in addressing the concern at the base. So, look, happy to take any questions on any or all of that. A bit of a whirlwind through a few things.
That's good, Dom. I know that Annalise is going to jump at this. And so am I. So after you.
Rightio. So a little bit of context might be helpful for my fellow colleagues. So it took me a couple of years to try and get an internal audit program across the line and the value add of what that would look like. So had 2 years, I think 2 years running. So when Deloitte were appointed as our provider of this service, in year one I wanted a risk-based internal audit program, and I requested that and said, I want you to do a risk assessment, understand where the risk is across council, talk to the Audit and Risk Committee, talk to the councillors, talk to management, look at all our incidences, look at where crises have happened, and develop a risk-based internal audit program. Now, we didn't get that. We got a very, I won't say vanilla, but a stock standard kind of hygiene program, which was fine for year one. So I kind of, as the chair at the time, I kind of endorsed that for year one. But year three, and this is kind of my departing kōrero, I wouldn't accept, like saying we were going to do asset management, but now we're going to do accounts payable. Accounts payable is another hygiene audit. Yes, we've got to get the basics right, but we're in year three. The plan has to be a mixture of hygiene, good kind of corporate governance audits, but it needs to be 50-50 of strategic type reviews, which is your kind of asset management or infrastructure or stuff that's happening in our reforms. Are we ready for it? Yeah. I could go on and on and on, but you've got to get that balance right in the program that we're looking at, strategic type reviews, not just going back for the third year to do the easy. I'm being a bit harsh, but I feel like these reviews, maybe it's management, maybe it's Deloitte, but we're going for the easy options. And so when we said we're not going to do asset management, but we'll shift to accounts payable, that kind of jumped out at me. The procurement work around, I think I've read in there, which is very, very important, the procurement life cycle of source, procure, manage. We have a whole lot of risk, and we talked about it earlier, a whole lot of risk around that source and procure bit, where you've got the source bit, which you've got conflicts of interest and fraud risk and managing that right. You've got the strategic bit, like how we actually go to market. When we go to market, do we actually, which type of procurement strategy do we take? And then very, very importantly, the manage bit, like how do we manage our contractors? We've got a 3-4 year contract. We've done all this work to get them in the door, but in year three, are we still getting quality? Are we still getting what's been delivered for? So, yeah, I'm going on because it's year three and I just expected better and would want better for the organisation, that we get really, and money's tight, right? We need to make sure we're getting really good value for money, and the review that we're looking at, there might be pressure on this program where you can only do 3 a year, so you've got to make sure that it's the 3 that we're going to get the best bang for buck.
Thank you, Annalise. Good summary. I'm going to ask Steve to respond, and then I'll go to you, Trace. Steve?
Noted, Annalise. I think, though, I'd have to say that staff, at the beginning of this internal audit journey, staff did rely a lot on both this committee and Deloitte's to kind of set out what would be a good starting point. So I absolutely recognise and acknowledge those discussions. But I think as we've gone through the audits, they aren't just things that we're done and ticked and put on a shelf. We've actually learnt from it, and part of the reason why we are identifying some of the things that we're putting forward today is because we are learning more about our organisation and our checks and controls. And I think staff have actually governed the direction of this, and I'd actually stand by that, because in order to grow and be really strategic, we've got to have real confidence in our base. And what we're learning is our base has some challenges, and we're a small organisation that's growing at pace. to match and reflect the community. And some of our systems and checks and balances haven't probably grown as fast as we need them to. And this internal audit is actually, we're using this as a assurance for our new council and this committee that the systems that we rely on to do our BAU and our general business are robust. And so I take your point about wanting to balance the administrative versus strategic, but we want to make sure our admin's really rock solid and really tight. Now, I think that's the way we've reviewed this approach. It's not that we're not wanting to be strategic, but in order to have confidence that we can be strategic, we've got to make sure our BAU is solid. So that would probably be my response to that. Dom, do you want to add anything more on that?
No, look, I think it's really helpful, and we took some comfort from the fact that Deloitte actually said your asset management has come a really long way, and now is not a good time to use those funds for that. Ultimately, this is the discussion that we wanted to have with you today, was we will come to you with a plan for endorsement in August for year 3. We are now 2 years on, and so how do we make sure that what was proposed in year 1 is still right or fit for purpose? So we can absolutely take it away. We will have further discussions. We're happy to take other suggestions, but absolutely we'll pull up what our risk register looks like now at that strategic level and actually have a discussion with Deloitte and really challenge them on where the best areas are to focus on, and bring that back as well.
Thank you. Trace?
I would just add thanks, Annalisa, for the background as well as the challenge. Deloitte has advised an internal audit would add limited additional value. From my perspective, sitting here, it would be useful to have more context around that, about why were they saying that, what were they basing that on, and it would have been useful to have that in here so that then I wouldn't be asking this question or wondering on a much lower level than Annalisa has just been wondering, because I don't want to cast aspersions, but I don't want us in a situation, I guess, where we have professional advisors, and no, we don't want to ignore them, but they're also running a business model, and I'm aware of that as well. And so that's about as overt as I'll get with that comment.
Well said, Trace. Okay. Couple of things from the chair, reinforcing Annalisa's perspective here, but also emphasising internal audit as advice to us, okay, as well as the organisation. I see internal audit as a function which gives us advice, but it also gives us the capacity to continually improve the organisation. And while I appreciate the conversation in relation to BAU, we tend to look at, as you've seen over the last couple of months, and you're seeing from our conversations in relation to health and safety and things like that, is that this organisation is starting to behave strategically. We're starting to invite council's commentary at the strategic level, the strategic governance level around culture and direction, and we're starting to respond that way. The assets of council are significant. Billions. Asset management is effective asset management is crucial to the ongoing development of a long-term plan, a cash flow, a funding stream, and getting it wrong creates more risks than potentially not paying things in a manner which they suggest otherwise. My expectation is when you look at asset management is not necessarily what we are currently doing, it's whether or not we're responding to the right choice frameworks, the right strategic frameworks in relation to what decisions we're making, whether or not the will of council and the policies that we've implemented and the choices and the frameworks they're responding in the right way to develop your long-term plan. Is that therefore developed in a way which you feel comfortable that you can achieve it? And once you've done it, I would expect an internal audit in relation to asset management to revisit some of the past decisions to make sure the things that you said you were making your decisions on have been captured and are you getting the benefit? I see far more value in those sorts of strategic conversations. So therefore, I'm going to be quite blunt, and you can talk to David about this. If David is promoting a plan which suggests you're doing it perfectly, he's not thinking about what he should be promoting, because we have found that we've had a few stub toes in relation to our asset planning. We know we don't spend in accordance with our long-term plan. So how we can possibly say that our asset management planning is there's no value to be added is beyond me. So I'd like you to remind them that we are curious as a group, and I'm responsible to council as an advisor in relation to this. My expectations are that you respond the way Annalisa described. Okay? So I'm not really that interested. Yes, I am interested in accounts payable iteration, but not as a substitute for one of those crucial parts of the organisation, because the other part I'm going to ask you to go look at some stage in the future is revenue planning, because those are your two key parts of this organisation that run what you do. So yes, Tracy, you were being subtle. I'm going to be a lot more blunt. I expect to see that, and I expect them to respond that way. Okay, so when we talk to them about what next year might look like, then my view would be, as you'd be saying, well, we need to be looking in terms of what my commentary that I just gave there. In relation to some hygiene factors, I expect these things to be closed. If part of the iteration is to go and it crosses up with another program we're doing, that is part of closing it off, because you're pushing it into that program. I don't expect to see it sitting there 80% complete. If you've got joined up, push it into that program and close it so that we are making progress. And you can talk to the teams using the authority of me, if you like, because in reality, your job is important. And I know, Steve, that the gang are trying to get their job done and respond to this, but get these things done. If they've been raised and the management team have responded that they see it as important, then make sure they do it. So I was a bit disappointed to see so many sort of sitting at quite a high level of completion without being done, because doing is also pushing into other areas as well. Okay? So take this as a positive step forward, not a growling, but I do expect this to be moving in those directions. Okay. Thank you. Any comments on that from anybody else? So we will receive the internal audit update. It does not look like we're endorsing the proposed changes. We're asking you to revisit those changes and have a think about what that means. Okay. Yes, I appreciate accounts payable may be easier, but let's think about what a revised asset management program might look like and when it might be deliverable, okay? And then I think that blends itself into discuss the proposed options for next year, okay? So I think if we receive the report and then we ask you to revisit those two items, are you comfortable with that, Steve? Ellie? Dom? All right. Can I have someone move that? I'll move that from the chair. Seconded by Sam. Thank you. Happy with that? Sophia, did you have any comments you wanted to make on that? Sorry.
No, sorry, that was just a thumbs up to go, yep, I'm good with that.
Perfect, thank you. I've got eagle-eyed Ellie sitting here. So, all right, we will move to the Treasury report. Thanks, Tom. Sorry, I was just making sure that I wasn't going to get clipped around the ear by Ali on that one. So. Hi, Dale. How are you?
Kia ora, all. Good, thank you. Hey, just like to start off by, sort of Neil's obviously away, he's absent, so I am here in lieu of that. Like to take the paper as read. We'll start with a quick high-level summary of what's included in the paper. So I know Councillor Wilshire has been focused around debt. So debt is 300 mil. It's at the end of March. This was the same commentary that was essentially in F&P. In order to give this bit more structure, I've now sort of looked at it and presenting to you on the basis of where we're at now currently. So debt has dropped, so we're down to 285. We have Selwyn Waters repaid their tranche of debt as agreed in the time frame, so we received 64 million from them end of April. That's then been deposited into term deposits to make the most of that money while we're waiting for our debt maturity in June. So I've leveraged that as much as I can. We have the LGFA standby facility as agreed in the last ARC meeting in place. That was in place on the 30th of April. And liquidity, excluding the term deposits, sitting at 116%. So we've pulled everything back as the overall direction and intention was. The other thing that has been since confirmed is our Fitch, so our ratings agency have reconfirmed our AA+ rating. So that's for SDC only, it's not group. Takes into account F&P reporting to date, annual report, treasury reporting for the quarters that have been, and enables us the best borrowing rate with LGFA. So any questions, happy to take them.
Ali's got a few comments.
Yeah, I think, thanks, Dale. I think just worth noting as well, so we spoke about earlier revisiting our Treasury policy and bringing that Treasury briefing back to full council. And I think to Bruce's point earlier, whilst we look at Treasury, we look at debt, we need to couple that with how we forecast our projects in the long-term plan, what that's going to look like. Asset management, making sure we've got our renewals and everything captured and they're fully expensed in the correct form and keeping with our policies. So, I mean, whilst this is a point in time space, there is a lot of work going on behind the scenes in this to make sure we've got that forward-looking piece in terms of that cash flow and how that then aligns and where our spending profiles sit. So I think it's just important to capture that this is only up to the end of March. We're probably looking at the Treasury briefing sometime in June, which will then sort of go to inform how this paper gets tabled and shared going forward.
Sam.
Thank you. So you can follow along, page 107. So long-term plan estimate was, well, forecast was going to be 346 million. Wonderful. We're under that. We're at 300. So management forecast with phased Selwyn Water Limited repayment 280.
So part of the reason that there's a difference there is that there was some deferral in the Selwyn Water repayment timeframes. So there was an extension given of 1 month as agreed. I think, was that part of the LGFA accession discussion?
Yeah.
Yes, so
Yeah,
that's
cool.
obviously created a timing difference as to what we've got loaded in the Power BI dashboard.
Cool.
But it wasn't material enough to actually reforecast that for this purpose.
Sweet. And of that 64 million that's currently sitting in our term deposit, waiting for those other LGFA loans to mature to pay them back, is that inclusive of the 20 million that we've freed up by having the LGFA standby facility now, or exclusive of it? Oh, I did a good question, I think.
So the 20 million obviously is LGFA, it's pseudo funds. We don't actually hold those funds. So those funds are now no longer to be held in our account. So that we received 64 million from Selwyn Water.
Yeah.
But of that, we were having to hold, I guess we were down at approximately sort of 40 million of our overall cash position before we, I guess we had used some of that to fund capital programs and works rather than having to draw on specific debt profile. So what we've done is now looked at it from an overall perspective. That 20 million is now being used in conjunction with our current debt balance to reduce and manage our liquidity ratio. So the 20 mil, so to speak, has not been wrapped up in that term deposit because we borrow on a cash required basis. So that cash was borrowed back in May, June last year, and it's essentially just been sitting there to manage that liquidity.
And as agreed, we're waiting for that borrowing to maintain our liquidity to mature, and then we're paying that back, and that is happening in June.
Yes. Yeah. So there was a couple of elements with the Soul and Water side of things, because there's the working capital facility too. So the working capital facility was, I guess, funded from surplus cash that council had in our account. So that's been repaid, and it was a 45 million plus interest tranche of debt.
So just so that we're clear,
Yep.
64
Yes.
from Selwyn Water Limited, 20 which we've freed up by utilising the standby facility as discussed. So that's 84 million, and then in our finance, I think it was finance and performance, we mentioned that week we paid back 15 million. So effectively in the next 2 to 3 months, we will have paid back $99 million worth of debt.
75. So the 260s and the 15 that was repaid.
Okay.
Because not all of that Selwyn Water debt repayment was in conjunction with LGFA debt that's maturing. It was just their debt profile that had been carved out as part of the internal loans process as to what was attributable to those waters assets.
So 75 million by the end of June.
Yes.
Cool beans.
So we're at this stage, from what I can see and best information they have at the point in time, we'll be looking at 225 as our closing debt balance for the financial year.
Woohoo! That might sound scary to those at home, but that's better than 300.09.
Which it may look like on a consolidated basis anyway. Remember that you'll bring Selwyn Waters back into the consolidated account because it's 100% owned. So don't get too excited.
But it's on the book, but it's on the book while being not on the book, while being on the book. Yeah.
And also remember there's a guarantee. So the reality of it is that the failure of Selwyn Waters is still a responsibility of SDC. The key, just in relation to cash management and treasury management, there is a conversation to be had at some stage about how joined up that conversation is going to be between Selwyn Waters and SDC over time, because the guarantee will require some level of liquidity or some level of understanding. May not require liquidity, but it will require some level of understanding to ensure that the funds are available for any potential. So in my view, and given the fact that I've been sitting in there on a temporary basis, in my view, that it'll take some time before we start to uncouple that conversation here, because otherwise it'll have a significant impact on price, i.e. rate price. When I'm talking about price, I'm talking about the impact that the joined up water charge and the rate will have on consumers. And that is something that you will need to be aware of, because externally our ratepayers are under a lot of pressure, not only from a rate infrastructural council-owned asset perspective, but also from a electricity, roading, general conversation perspective. So I think that it would be wrong of council to not contemplate in the initial instance a holistic conversation about what our long-term plan looks and what Selwyn Waters' plan looks like and what the conversation is. So Selwyn Waters are thinking now in terms of that joined up conversation and how assets can be delivered to improve the resilience of the asset and the redundancy in the system, and better utilising the redundancy in the system without placing too much burden on the overall outcome. But that means that debt will have to be managed probably to the benefit of all. Annalisa.
Thank you. Just one probably easy question from me. Where did we land with the payback ratio conversation we had last year around it not being a breach of LGFA, but it being a breach of policy? We were going to change the policy, or it's just so we don't end up with another issue with Audit New Zealand?
Yeah, I think, Annalisa, that's sort of what I alluded to just after Dale has spoken. So we know our Treasury policy is overly conservative, but we weren't going to make the changes to the policy knowing that the impact of what Selwyn Water was going to have. So now that we've moved the Selwyn Water stuff out, there's two things in play. One, we'll do the briefing back to Council, and post that we will update the Treasury policy as well.
Just on Treasury management, and we'll come back to it again, Ali, and maybe you and I need to talk about it a little bit further and join it up a little bit. We can get excited about what our debt position looks like, but we have to have a conversation about what it would look like joined together, because our debt profile historically responded to an expectation of asset build-up. And if that debt profile changes in Selwyn Water, then it's actually, we can get excited about the fact ours is growing, but if theirs growing too much, then I've got a problem, in my view, from that perspective. I would, well, not necessarily if it's affordable, but what it is you've got to look at it and say, if Selwyn Waters are asking the economy to respond to a level of construction build in the Selwyn and SDC is, we'll get back to the point where nothing gets delivered because we've only got so much capacity to do anything. So it's a physical, can we build it conversation as opposed to a can we fund it conversation, and then we'll end up with our long-term plan failing against our long-term overall consolidated plan, and then we're going to probably end up with credit lines which we're paying for that we don't need, and all sorts of things, debt surpluses because we've asked for it in the rate. So I do want that joined up for a while.
Okay. And I think, Bruce, just to add to that as well, we are having very regular conversations with Selwyn Water around how they're tracking with some things. Selwyn Water will also be bringing their financial reporting back to finance performance. And I think they're doing the one-year water strategy. So when it gets to the longer-term planning, that will then align with our long-term plan, which gives us that broader picture of what we look like, what they look like, and how that overall debt headroom sits.
So just explaining to this committee from a risk perspective, by bringing the expectation from Selwyn Water back to a 1 year, there's more time now to contemplate what the out years might look like. And they have acknowledged that, we are joined up for that 1 year anyway. Okay, so that makes it easier. And they've come back, they've sunk back a little bit on their future, on their expectations in terms of what an increase might look like as well, and that work is still ongoing. Okay. So from a fiscal risk perspective, far more comfortable than we were this time last meeting in relation to what that might look like. Okay, are there any other questions in relation to Treasury policy? We're going to take the PwC report as read, but we are simply not going to respond too much to it because we could be here all day responding to the out-year conversation, which in my view is provocative but irrelevant because we haven't actually, some of the stuff they've given us is well outside our policy regime and giving us cost parameters, which just made me grumpy. Okay, so while I appreciate all the work they went into it,
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the other thing too is all of that hedging strategy's got to be reviewed in conjunction with the shedding of this debt. So while we can look at it at the end of March, there's a much sort of longer focus that needs to come into play here, and especially with the interest rate pressures that we're seeing at the moment.
Yeah, I agree. All right. Any other comments in relation to the Treasury report? Can we let Dale go? All right. Can someone move that we receive that? Thank you, Sam. Seconded, Annalisa. Perfect. Thank you, Dale. Legal and compliance. Dom, back you come. Or am I required to have, hang on a minute, governance perspective, can someone remind me when is a break due? 11:30? Awesome.
Chair, I believe that they're going to shuffle the order so then I can get all the other bits before that. So.
Perfect. Okay. Well, we'll respond to that as it comes up. We know that Sam's already declared a conflict. Could you just indicate to the chair that this is the item and away we go? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. So, look, we will take the paper as read. In terms of engagement, we've got updated dashboard reporting, not least of all because the legal team were jealous of what was going on in the risk function and also wanted good tables. We don't have a huge amount to say. Engagement is consistent. This team is 18 months in, and I know we provided exception reporting here, but it would be remiss if Soph and I didn't take a moment to acknowledge the team here. We've now cracked $1 million in internal time recording for this financial year, 8 weeks ahead of sort of where our target has set. We are biased. We think the team is great. But I do need to acknowledge that there's some exceptional work that's been done and recognised by our peers in industry. The legal team has been named as finalists in the In-House Lawyers Association's awards for small in-house team and people and culture. So it goes to really acknowledge that work from and Kirsty and Danielle, who I hope are listening online, because why else did I say it? No, so a real credit to the work, and I think we see that we're really finding our groove in terms of engagement and those sorts of things. So I am going to pass to Sophie to talk to a bit of a policy update, and then we will open it to the floor to take any feedback on the level of reporting we now provide and any feedback you might have.
Thank you. Sophie, welcome.
Thank you. So just in relation to policies, so you'll see that the numbers haven't changed much, but there has been a lot of work going on in the background. Basically, we've been engaging with the various departments in relation to the overdue policies. And what we're actually finding is, firstly, that there are a number of policies that aren't actually required. For example, we've got a policy in relation to the times of death of a staff member, when actually we don't really need that kind of policy. So there's a number of those policies which are being marked as overdue in those numbers, but in your next update you'll see that we're actually reducing those policy numbers. Also, there's a lot of instances where there's a number of policies about one issue. We've got 7 policies in relation to water races. So there's a lot of actually consolidation that we can do to actually clarify our policy suite, and once we get it down to a manageable number, then that's actually where the gears of governance and policy can actually work once it's all sort of rationalised. So that work is going on behind the scenes. So I just wanted to make that clear that the numbers don't look like we're doing a lot of work, but we are. And so we'll be reporting on that again next time.
Okay, thank you. Questions? Tracy.
Less a question than a bit of information, just to let people know that the what are we called, so?
Governance and Law Reform Portfolio.
Thank you.
Assume that's what you're talking about.
The Governance and Law Reform Portfolio had its first meeting yesterday, and that one of the things that's come out of that is that Aaron and I are going to do a presentation to the report writers. So that switches the table somewhat, but it's an opportunity for us to present how we would like to be presented to, I guess. But Aaron and I both agree that it's a really useful mechanism to have this portfolio from a governance stance, because when we get the information to the councillors in the right form and the right way, it not only saves everybody time, but I think it's going to improve the quality of decisions that are made. So thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. Okay, I've got a comment at the risk of being growled at by the legal team, because I'm going to promote the conversation around AI, and normally when I do that with lawyers I get told that that's not necessarily the right outcome. Having said that, within another in-house legal team that I'm familiar with, I have been advised that they're getting some real outcomes around processing. You can't delegate your responsibility to ensure the correctness of what the outcomes are, but probably 85% of the production now is capable of being run through our AI bots. And I was looking at it in response to 3.3, which is the team is progressing the finalisation of a comprehensive suite of legal templates, well aware that those templates are now being built very, very quickly and rebuilt very, very quickly within the AI framework. And I was wondering whether or not we were curious and using that kind of technology in our environments?
We are absolutely curious, and we absolutely use the technology while encouraging people to remember that Copilot is a secure system where confidential information is kept within the organisation, and ChatGPT is not. So look, absolutely we are encouraging it, and we're really conscious that a lot of our external providers are now starting to use technology to build templates and those sorts of things. So we're having a lot of questions. This is about how can we our balance is looking at actually what can be really self-serviced and safe, so that I guess across the organisation people are using sensible templates rather than thinking they need to rely on Copilot, which is a great tool, in the right hands.
Yeah, and I could add to that as well. So we have been looking at building an AI agent to support report writing as well. But I think your comment around templates is the key thing, right? If once we get the templates correct, that's what we feed into AI to support the production of material. What we don't want is AI creating templates that don't actually work. Mm-hmm. So we kind of need to do this foundational work to actually really leverage the power of AI.
The risk you have is that the when I say the risk, the thinking, conventional thinking in relation to the progress we're making there's been paradigm shifts in capacity, and how we're thinking today is not how it's potentially likely to be tomorrow. And if you look at the strength now coming through sort of, Claude and the upgrades they've had over the last 10 days, you go like, geez, and my view would be is that curiosity in this area is you should be ruthless in your curiosity because it's getting better and better and better and better. But I'm not going to belabor the point because you'll find that yourselves. What I'm worried about is the fact that, well, there's two things going on. What I'm worried about is that if we don't embrace it quickly, we will be mandated externally through some very helpful central government agencies. And the other one is that when you're using external consultants who are using it, you should be chasing value here because they will be trying to retain it. Okay? Now, which is shooting myself in the foot because I sit on the board of a number of professional organisations and I'll be saying exactly the other thing. But the reality of it is that we're in an environment where you should be sharing in the benefits. You don't want to put people out of business, but you do want to note that they are getting productivity benefits that potentially should be passed into the environment. And it's one of the few ways you can capture some benefits in the organisation from a sinking lid perspective, because sooner or later they will flow in its entirety into the community. And just from a business perspective, if we start getting frightened about AI, just remember two or three things. One is that the capital markets in the US are now starting to discount heavily anybody in the processing sector if they're not using AI. Oracle have just put off 30,000 people, computer programming people in their organisation, but what they fail to tell you is that they've just put on 10,000 AI specialists. So they are moving their organisations. So we should be prepared to. And the other thing is that AI is not cheap. So if you're not getting the productivity benefits, you're paying a lot for a tool, which is quite expensive to own. So I will be very curious over future meetings in areas where I think there is a heavy reliance on processing as to what progress you're making, because the risk of not making progress is very high from a fiscal perspective. Okay, Tracy.
I'm back because AI. I accept everything Bruce has just said, and I would add that there are also a lot of studies coming out telling us about the degeneration of critical thinking. And that is related pre-AI to the use of technology. So although the cohort from 97 to 2012 are the most educated in the Western world of any of the generations before them, they are also performing the worst. So that, as with everything, there's a balance. But my specific comment is in relation to 3.7. As somebody who might have been described even in this organisation as a vexatious legoimerer, I'd just like to put in a plug for people who do broad wording and requests for correspondence in any form that don't use AI, but because they don't know what the documentation or whatever might be at the other end. And therefore they are wanting a catch-all because they want you to locate all of that. But also thinking about templates. I'm thinking of some kind of assistance to people who are doing legoimas so they do understand that when you ask them to not be broad, it's not because you're trying to not provide. So maybe there is something in that space on the website or whatever that explains what it looks like when you say don't be broad. What do you mean by that? And I think you may find that the turning to AI is partly because people are out of their depth. They're not going to go read the Act. Even people who ought to go read the Act regularly don't. And so, yeah, I think there is a dual thing going on here. It isn't just people spurting out vivacious emails to you. I think there's an element of people trying to navigate the system to get to what they want. And there was something that, Sophie, you might have said, Dom, somebody has said in the last 6 months that sat in my head, and maybe it was in response to one of my own legoimas. But it's, what is it you actually want? What are you asking for? What are you trying to get to? And I think people maybe are a little bit nervous about saying that because of a perception that if I tell you exactly what I want, you'll find a way to not give it to me. So that would just be putting my advocate of the community hat on, that there's all that at play. But maybe a template type thing as an educational.
Yes, absolutely.
Useful.
We do have guidance on the website, but I think you're right that we can clarify that. The other thing we definitely do when people send in broad requests, we do, under the Act, go to them to try and get them to refine that scope, particularly if we're going to refuse on the grounds of substantial collation. But in terms of opportunities of AI, when we do get a very long, lengthy legoima request, we actually use AI to help pull out what it is that is actually the information that's being asked for. Yep. So I think that context being provided by a legoima requester is really useful, but also when it gets down to it, we actually just need to get the list of what the information they wanted. So there's opportunities to clarify the guidance, and we will do that, and also opportunities to improve our processes. So we're definitely looking at that all the time.
Cool, thank you.
Thank you. And Lisa?
Thank you. Just a quick comment from me. As Bruce said, it's changing weekly at the moment, isn't it? And I was completing a review a couple of weeks ago for an organisation around AI data governance. So they're very mature, heavily adopted across the entire organisation. But it's not so much from the strategic viewpoint, but from a risk perspective is, what's the governance around that and their concerns around third-party usage. So we and kind of link it into our internal audit program, right? So we think about and the reason I'm talking to you guys is the Privacy Act and ComCom. So this organisation, we're concerned about accidentally sharing of competitor pricing because of AI doing it, so not them doing it, but actually, and so we're trying to have conversations with ComCom going, well, can you give us some guidance on this? Because what if we accidentally share PIR data just because of our usage or our third party or our partners or our that wider system use of AI. So it's almost like you've got the strategic piece, which is, as Bruce said, adopt now, but then also the data governance kind of piece going along parallel and trying to keep up really so that, and it's, so I guess at a higher level, it's what is the organisation doing? Maybe it's a Steve question. You don't want to create another subcommittee for another subcommittee, but it's almost getting where you need to have a strategic organisational view on what Selwyn's doing, and not the legal team's view and the finance team's view, but across the group.
I think just, Annalisa, to your points, we've got an AI briefing that's going to ELTA, if not next week, the week after. And once that's done, then that'll take the form of coming back to council, so it's visible around what we're actually doing in that space and the controls that we're putting around it, and whether that be from a legal stance or finance across the business as a whole.
Last comment there is just think about third parties as well. So I know, as an example, I was reviewing a Audit New Zealand letter for another local government, and there's a clause, I think, when you're doing the the assurance letter, you're actually requiring your third parties to tell you where your data's going and the use of AI that they're using.
Yep, well aware of that one, thanks. And I think this AI briefing will also look at the tools that we use as well, and actually retiring the ones that are not necessary, and actually having people using what we're actually setting out, because they've been tested and they're fit for purpose.
So one of the things that you have to be aware of when you're entering into an environment where new tech is becoming freely, not freely, but available, is that the tech and the use of it will run ahead of the governance of it. So we are now in a higher risk environment than, and you have to accept that, and Steve, you're going to have to be aware of the fact that we are vulnerable for a wee while until we understand it better. So therefore, it's going to have to be a level of what are we doing? How is it? How are we being interrogated? And we will have to accept there's a level of pragmatism here, and potentially a high level of risk as we build this plane while we're flying it. Okay, because that's kind of what we're doing here. And I'm going to make the point we might have a few unintended outcomes here that we have to be pragmatic about, and we have to be capable of being responding quickly. Always remember, in all circumstances, you can delegate your authority, but not your responsibility. So as we delegate our authority to these new tools, we've got to make sure that we have the responsibility, but fairly and clearly pegged. Okay. Thank you. Everybody happy that we accept the legal and compliance report? Do I have a mover? Thank you, Tracy. Seconder, Sam. Right. I now move that we conclude the public part of the meeting and move into the public excluded reasons, public excluded part of the meeting. I have a mover for that. Thank you, Annalisa. Seconder, Tracy. All right, we'll take a wee break right now, and when we come back, we'll be in public excluded. Okay, thank you.